All right. Again, welcome everyone to the Forest Stewardship Cone and Seed Collection webinar. Tonight we have several speakers. We're going to talk about the reforestation cycle and need, American Forest Cone Corps, the CAL FIRE and U.S. Forest Service nurseries, and agency landowner collaboration efforts, and an online cone and seed tree app that we're hoping that you as private forest landowners will utilize and help us maybe address, meet some of the cone and seed needs that we're experiencing. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first speaker, Bridget. If you could, you should be already a co-host. You can come on, and if you could introduce yourself. If you have, I will say for the participants, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and speakers, I will politely interrupt and ask the question as it comes along.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. Thanks for introducing me. Is my audio okay? I know earlier today, some people said I sounded really quiet. So just
yeah, if you could turn it up a little bit more, that would be great.
All right, let's see what I can do. How's this? Is that any better?
It's a little better.
Okay. Let's see. All righty, I'm gonna stick with that then. And then, yeah, feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself if you can't hear me too well. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty. And then can't see my screen, please let me know so that. Alrighty, I'll dive in. So thanks everyone for having me. My name is Bridget Mulkerin. I'm the California Cone Corps Manager with American Forests. I started with American Forests nearly a year ago. And prior to being at American Forests, I was studying for my master's degree in environmental policy, and I also was an AmeriCorps volunteer and a Peace Corps volunteer. The reason I bring up my background is because prior to working at American Forests, I had the opportunity to work with many landowners who were planting either in urban landscapes, supporting at volunteer events for wetland and forest restoration. And in the Peace Corps, I had the opportunity to work with farmers who were planting native trees in their own farms. And from that work, I recognized really the importance of landowners having opportunities to plant on their own land, but also the value that it has for local ecosystems, economies, communities, and much more. So I really appreciate you all being here and wanting to learn more. With that, I will dive in to the Reforestation Pipeline Partnership and the reforestation cycle in California. So my first question for everybody is just what interests you in learning more about cone collection and reforestation in general? If you want to put that in the chat, feel free. That would be awesome to just to learn from you all. Alrighty, and then I'm going to go over the agenda. So first I'll give some background on American Forests and the work that we do. I'll go into the California's seed need, and then I'll move into the Reforestation Pipeline Partnership and specifically Cone Corps, which is the program that I am managing. And at the end, I'll leave time for questions and answers as well. So American Forests is the nation's oldest conservation organization, and we work to pre-store and restore forest ecosystems for the benefit of people, water, wildlife, and climate. I already mentioned this piece, but to dive in a little bit more, we are nearly 150 years old, headquartered in Washington, D.C., and worked to establish the Civilian Conservation Corps with President Roosevelt. Also worked to develop the Forest Service with the Department of Agriculture, and more recently have been involved in policies such as the Inflation Reduction Act. We envision a world where people have equitable access to forest benefits, and One really awesome tool that really aligns with our vision that American Forest has developed is the tree equity tool, which is a tool that's online. You can search tree equity score on our website or on Google, and it should pop up. From there, you can input your zip code and actually see what your tree equity score is for your neighborhood. I believe it was Phoenix that recently utilized their tree equity score to implement their urban forestry reforestation plan. So it's a fun tool to learn more about your community. Our impact model includes 3 parts. So there's an innovation lab. So that tool that I just mentioned was developed through our innovation lab. We also have research that has been conducted about reforestation efforts across the country. We work with place-based partners to restore and restore those forest landscapes, both in urban settings and in large forest landscapes. And finally, we are involved in that movement building that I mentioned earlier. So the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act to ensure that we have funding at the federal level to support reforestation across the country, as well as other career pathway programs on both the urban and landscape side of forestry, and are involved throughout the United States in different campaigns and coalitions to improve our forest ecosystems. American Forest has been working in California since 1991. We've planted nearly 10 million trees and been involved in over 140 reforestation projects. These numbers might have changed since our Southern Reforestation Manager on Sequoia and Kings Canyon is wrapping up her planting season, and our Northern Reforestation Manager, who's based in El Dorado, is wrapping up his planting season as well on the Caldor fire. And additionally, we partner with many organizations and agencies throughout the state. I mentioned earlier that our headquarters are in Washington, D.C., but our second office was opened in 2020 in North Fork, California, which is the exact center of California. Alrighty, now moving into California's seed need. So I'm going to have a lot of information that might be new to a lot of folks during this section. So I'm going to try to take it slow, but if you have any questions, again, please feel free to, if you need to have me pause or anything like that, I'm happy to take it slow. Alrighty. So this slide outlines the California Reforestation Challenge and also the opportunity. So the California Governor's Reforestation Working Group, which is a part of the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force, recognized that there is an 1.5 million acre reforestation opportunity across the state. That opportunity is due to the fact that we've had many fires throughout the state that have been high severity wildfires, which means that it's really wiping out that ecosystem and not allowing for the natural regeneration to occur, which requires people coming in to support that reforestation, to support that ecosystem to be able to rebuild itself. And we all know the value of forests is not only for our community and our wildlife and our water, but it's important for carbon sequestration, it's important for our economies, and it's important because we love the forests. So this was, last week I had the opportunity to go out in the El Dorado National Forest and support with the planting. And you could really see on that scar, I believe it was the King Fire scar, where the high severity wildfire really was up to the top of the canopy of those trees. And so you can recognize just from looking around that that natural regeneration is not likely to occur. And so getting those seedlings in the ground is really important. But there's so many steps before that seedling can get in the ground that are really important to recognize. And that's really what we're all here to talk about, is how that seed can get into the ground, where that, seedling, and where that seed comes from to produce that seedling. So how do we get here? How do we get all the seedlings that are in her pack to be able to put in the ground? We have to find the seed. So currently, again, we have that 1.5 million acre reforestation opportunity, but we don't have the seeds in the public seed banks in California to fill that need. So we're short the amount of seeds that we need to be able to reforest. It's becoming more and more challenging as well to acquire these seeds because it takes a lot of energy from trees to produce the cones that are necessary that hold those seeds. All of their energy really goes into that cone production. So with drought and challenging environmental situations such as disease and other factors that have come to play, trees are having to rely on themselves to survive more and producing less and less cone crops. So they don't have as much energy to produce. An example would be the ponderosa pine. The ponderosa pine typically produces cones every 7 years. However, recently, with the amount of stress that ponderosa pines across the West have been under, they're actually producing every 14 years or sometimes even longer. And so knowing that there's further gaps in between these seed crops, it's even more important that we recognize when there's a viable seed crop and that we're able to implement mechanisms to utilize those seeds and have those seeds in our state seed banks. I wanted to show this image because I think that it's really beautiful and it shows that the trees are really, again, putting all their nutrients that they can and all their energy into producing those cones. So when a tree is producing a cone crop, it's very unlikely that they'll be using a lot of energy elsewhere to have new leaf growth or grow in size. They really are using all of that energy. However, if a heat wave comes through in the midst of a tree producing a cone crop, there are times when trees will actually abort that crop and release all of those cones off of the tree. Sometimes this happens really close to the point where the cone is ready to be sent to the nurseries, and sometimes it happens months in advance. That's why it's really important to monitor and have people on the ground being the eyes on the forest watching these cone crops when they are viable. And when I say viable cone crop, really what I'm saying is healthy. So we want to make sure that there's not insect damage, that there's enough cones on the tree and things like that. Also that the tree looks healthy in general. So I mentioned many parts of the reforestation pipeline already, but this is really understanding all the steps that it takes to get that seedling in the ground. So it starts with the seed and finding those seeds, watching those seeds. From there, there's a lot of people behind the scenes taking care of those seeds when they reach the seed banks, caring for those baby seedlings and making sure that they're able to grow in a way that is healthy for them to be outplanted in sometimes really tough conditions out on these forested landscapes. Additionally, there's steps such as site prep and planning for the outplanting. Then there's the outplanting and post-planting monitoring to ensure that we know the best mechanisms and ways to replant depending on the landscape and depending on the ecosystem surrounding. So there's so many steps along the way of this reforestation pipeline. And within each of these steps is not only the resources themselves, the seeds, the seedlings, the shovels even, it's also the people. There's a lot of people involved in reforestation, and getting more people involved in this work is going to be critical as the need is great and we need to increase that pace and scale to reach our goals. So I've talked a lot about seeds so far, but I haven't really talked about where they come from and where the state the state and federal, we have two public seed banks in the state of California. One is the LA Moran Reforestation Center, which is operated by CAL FIRE, and I believe you'll be hearing from Denia later today. She magnificently manages that seed bank. And then additionally, the U.S. Forest Service seed bank is in Placerville, the Placerville Nursery. So if anyone has any ideas of where those public nurseries receive their seeds from, feel free to put those in the chat or ponder, think about it. It's something that I never really thought about, despite being involved in different aspects of forestry and reforestation before joining American Forests and being involved in this work. So for anyone who is thinking that it involves someone climbing to the tops of these large, beautiful conifer trees, you're correct. So many of the seeds, probably nearly all of the seeds in the state seed bank come from a monitored cone crop that is then reported to the state seed banks and the federal seed bank. And then it's determined that it's healthy and viable. And a crew of climbers will come in and climb to the top of the tree, remove the cone from the tree, and then those cones are transported to the nursery into the state seed bank and the federal seed bank, so that these seeds are stored properly, really well taken care of, and able to germinate in the future to become a seedling. There are other ways that you can acquire seeds as well. However, at the pace that we need these seeds, getting them from wild sources is really our best opportunity at this point. One example of another way to have a seed source is to have a seed orchard. And there are a few in California that are private industry has some seed banks, and the U.S. Forest Service has some seed banks. CAL FIRE and Forest Service are both working to expand potentially, seed orchards throughout the state. But at this point, it would take about 12 to 15 years for some of those trees to produce cones. So it takes time for these trees to mature to be able to produce those cones. And so we don't have that type of time to wait. And the current seed orchards that do exist do not have the genetic diversity that we need. So in order to ensure that we have the genetic integrity of the trees in the California forests and are able to rapidly increase our reforestation efforts, we really need to be looking at these wild cones. Another piece that I just want to mention with the climbing is that access to the tree is really important because of the process that it takes for someone to climb a tree. So for example, a tree that's really in the center of the forest that's far away from road accessibility, it's a lot harder to, it's a lot much harder and resource intensive to be able to get that cone crop. Whereas when a tree growing within a distance from a road where a crew can get in to have people climb and have people collect those cones is really important for the work that's being done. And this is an awesome image that is CAL FIRE's, and I really love to look at it because not only does it really explain that whole reforestation cycle and the pipeline, but it also explains the timing of each piece. So you'll notice that the first one, it's a little hard for me to see because of the zoom bar, but that cone monitoring piece is from June to July. And so that's the time when we really need people to be able to be the eyes on the forest, looking for those cone crops that are healthy. And then from there, they move into a collection during August and September. One of the things that I want to note is that wildfire season also overlaps with the same time period. That's one of the reasons why it's really challenging to have the amount of workforce that's necessary to get this work done available, because there's so much going on at that time. Often, unfortunately, many wildfires have required a lot of energy and resources to be protecting. And of course, that's such important work And at the same time, we still need this work to be done. And so that's where the Reforestation Pipeline Partnership comes in that I'll touch on in a little bit. I can't see the chat, but if anyone wanted to ask any questions now, I welcome you to go ahead and unmute. Otherwise, I can continue along.
So Bridget, I'll go ahead and read the question.
Okay, great.
Who judges the quality of the trees on private land?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm actually going to touch on this now. So I guess that's my sign to continue. Alrighty, so I'm going to dive in then. So the Reforestation Pipeline Partnership and California Cone Corps is what I'm going to talk about now. So I mentioned the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force and how there's many working groups and sub-working groups within that task force. One group in particular is the Reforestation Working Group. And that working group recognized that there are two things that really need to happen in order to increase the pace and scale of reforestation. One, we need more experts coming together to work collaboratively, to network, to share resources, and have those conversations more regularly to be able to take action on bottlenecks along the reforestation pipeline. That's the cooperative piece. The second piece to the Reforestation Pipeline Partnership is California Cone Corps. And so that program is increasing workforce across California to be the eyes on the forest, but to also work along that reforestation pipeline in all parts that I mentioned earlier. So the California Cone Corps is really that workforce program, workforce solution to save California's native conifer seeds that are needed in the state seed banks. So currently we have 6 California Cone Corps, but we are quickly growing as the cone season is upon us. So we have people working currently in the state seed banks and on landscape level projects. We also have them supporting nursery work and working with data to determine what the seed need is and what's in our state seed banks, what we need to fill. And so the reason that I said that I would address that question during this time is because California Cone Corps will be working throughout the state to monitor cone crops as well. So you'll notice there's a couple cones there, and it's actually going to be a couple more as well throughout the state that will be monitoring cone crops. And if a private landowner is in need of support in determining whether or not a crop is viable, California Cone Corps are to work on both public and private lands to monitor cone crops. And so if you need support in doing that, Cone Corps can definitely help with that and be a support person. So if I know that we'll talk about reporting crops later on in the session today, but there are ways to communicate that. Once you reported a crop, or if you have a question about a crop, you can contact me, can let you know if there's a local Cone Corps in the area and how we can support you. It's so important that private landowners are involved in this work, because the land, the ecosystem, the forest ecosystem is all working together. It doesn't know those boundaries. It doesn't know public versus private lands. And so that's why California Cone Corps is working across those lands, because we recognize that we can't just, stop. We don't want to have to stop, at a certain border, or a certain area. We want to be able to work cross boundary and collaborate and have collective action on this issue, because it's such a huge challenge that needs to be addressed. And we need everybody's support in doing so. One of the reasons that California Cone Corps is also important is there are not very many it takes a while to catch the eye. I mean, of course, you all have probably seen coastal redwood cones that are very tiny, and then you have other species that have much larger cones, but it takes a while to develop that eye to recognize those cones at times. And so having that second guess is is really important, but hopefully with the California Cone Corps, having people in the workforce and growing their reforestation career from this, from having been out in the field and looking at cone crops for summer, hopefully they're able to build that skill, continue in the field, and then we have more and more people that have the eye for a cone crop. Like Denia has an awesome eye for one, so like she's a great example of someone who has developed that skill, but I know that it does take time. So these are our first 2 cone corps that we had brought on, and they are increasing capacity at the state seed banks, but they've also had opportunities to work in other outplanting opportunities as well. So again, how can cone corps support you? You might have talked to Natalie at the nursery. She helps with seedling orders with landowners, but also in that viable cone crop monitoring. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you with someone who's local in your area and be able to support with this work. Alrighty. Does anyone have any questions for me? I can stop sharing my screen here.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Good morning. How are we training up new people for the Cone Corps?
Yeah, that's a great question. Cone Camp is one of the ways that we will be training our Cone Corps. They'll be attending that, and that is being developed in partnership with American Forests, CAL FIRE, and the U.S. Forest Service, as well as some private industry folks as well. So the Cone Corps will be learning from the experts from CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service, and additionally, I will be hopefully supporting them throughout the season, working to connect with experts who know more than I do when questions arise that are something that I'm not sure of. And so just that continual support both in the field and before going out in the field will be the way that we are training our Cone Corps.
And there is a question from Tim in the chat box. Is the state looking for cones from private landowners? And yes.
Yes, definitely.
And we'll be elaborating on that in just a bit, Tim.
Yeah. Alrighty, thank you.
All right. If you have any more questions for Bridget, you keep going and putting them in the chat box. We have some time at the end of the webinar to answer other questions. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Denia from CAL FIRE LA Moran Nursery. Denia, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Oh, you're muted. Still muted. Still muted.
There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Sometimes I can get this to work. Sometimes. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Denia Troxell. I am the CAL FIRE State Seed Bank Manager, and I hold this very humbling position here for the state of California. And I have to say, I want to start off by saying Bridget has done a great job at just kind of summarizing everything, really giving a great presentation about what really is our need, our problems throughout the state, and our partnerships that we're trying to develop here with just initiatives, CAL FIRE itself, myself. I currently am one of 2 full-time employees that kind of have this wonderful task of collecting conifer seeds throughout the entire state of California. So for 2 people, it can be kind of daunting and overwhelming, as you might already know. However, that's why we're kind of doing these sort of outreaches and why we're partnering with American Forests, the U.S. Forest Service, and some private entities, as well as trying to develop contracts with other private companies as well, is because we need to figure out a way to have this cooperative environment where, we share resources. No one person, no one entity can do it alone. That should be kind of like the overwhelming and overarching kind of topic and, takeaway that you get from at least this conversation and this sort of series that you see. All of these fires have devastated areas. I saw some chats here, people have area that have been, devastated by fires or drought, everything else. And what you find is you're not going to find seed in some of your areas. And I want you to take a moment and think about why that is. Bridget mentioned that there are 2 seed banks currently that are somewhat somewhat public. So CAL FIRE's State Seed Bank is the only seed bank in the entire state of California that is run by the state and that will sell seed directly to a customer. The U.S. Forest Service does collect and does have seed in their seed banks. However, that is specifically for the U.S. Forest Service, and under their mandates, they are not allowed to sell seed to customers. We do have some other private, seed banks that occur from private entities, timberland companies, as well as other private companies that are emerging that are great. We need to have more partners in this. But keep in mind that for CAL FIRE, our specific goal here is not to make money out of anything. Our specific goal is to help the private non-industrial landowners through these wonderful collaborations that we're talking about here and in other areas that we'll be pursuing in the future. So with that, I'm going to start with my portion of the conversation, which is we have all of this need. How do we prioritize things? How do we try to go for that crop that might be present, and which areas and what sort of resources do we need in order to try to capture as much information, as much surveys, as much crop out there that we can for the limited resources that we have. So the first option, Bridget already mentioned, is wonderful collaborations. So for CAL FIRE's mission statement is to serve and safeguard the people and protect the properties and resources of California. So we kind of already touched bases on this. Like, what does this mean in terms of reforestation? The seed bank here provides seeds where able to private non-industrial landowners. The primary use of the seeds has been for reforestation purposes post-fires. So I work at LA Moran Reforestation Center in Davis, and we have seeds available for your area. The caveat is, what is your area exactly? For those of you who do not know, CAL FIRE does not own a lot of land. We are not the U.S. Forest Service. We are not major timberland companies. The major land ownerships that we have are the demonstration state forests, which are not representative of what a lot of private industrial landowners need, nor do we have sufficient species and diversity within those areas to have wild collections and stands. And so one of the purposes of this kind of introduction or this talk with you guys here is to see if you guys would be willing to have CAL FIRE and American Forest and our cooperative here kind of have access to your land for cone survey purposes and cone collection purposes. Think about where that seed comes from. I get a lot of wonderful questions from landowners coming to us. I have a reforestation need post-fire. I am in the seed zone and this elevation. Do you have this species? And unfortunately, like you guys have seen in this chat, there's a lot of places that CAL FIRE Seed Bank does not have seed for. One of the main reasons is because of that landowner access. We cannot collect seed on land we do not have access to. So to kind of circle back to how do we prioritize areas. Here at the seed bank, we developed what is called the assessment of needs, which is revised every year depending on fires, depending on demand from their nurseries and from our nursery, as well as just other variables such as any drought that might have occurred, things like that. And the reason why it was done is because the state is immense in proportion, and we're responsible for it. So we did this assessment of needs. It's not anything that is novel. We just simply needed some way to kind of figure out how to get the areas that we're looking to target. So what we did here at the seed bank is we developed a spatial analysis where we took conifer forests and timberlands, we overlapped those footprints, we added the seed zones with elevation bands. We took into account the wildfires that have occurred in the past 10 years. We saw that demand. We created this list of which this middle section right here is a subsection of. This list is massive. We also took into account what is already in the state seed bank and developed this sort of color-coded list where hopefully you guys are able to read this, but we have a key here where the highest priority is any place that has greater than 100 bushels of need. For those of you who are not sure or cannot visualize what a bushel is if you think about a Home Depot bucket, a bushel is a bucket and a half, roughly, depending on species. So that's about nine gallons or so dry weight, dry volume, sorry. So that's a lot that we have to do. So 100 bushels or more is our highest priority, and that's going to be our red color. Medium is going to be between 11 and 100 bushels, and the low priority is white, which is less than 10. And so this list is broken down by seed zone, elevation bands of 500 feet. You see here, we have CAL FIRE units, and the reason we have that is because this assessment is specifically for CAL FIRE and the areas that we would be responsible for. We also have the fire associated with it, with these areas as well. What does this really give us? That's one of the main topics here, is it gives us the need that is incredibly big, and it's 76,304 bushels needed. So if you think again about that Home Depot bucket and a half, 76,000 of that would be needed just to reforest the forested land area in California, 25%, not even 100% of what it used to be, but 25% of that area within a 500-foot elevation band in various species at 25%, at 200 trees per acre. And that's kind of just an average. Some of you will know that, depending on where you are within the state, that can vary, but that's an average. And this is just a target. There's no way that we're going to be able to hit 76,000 bushels in 1 year because of many factors, but primarily is because the trees do not produce every year. There's also environmental factors. But when we break that down overall within the entire state, we see that the species and bushels needed are right here. And this is just a section of what we need. Here at CAL FIRE Seed Bank, you will note that we focus primarily on conifer species. We are slowly moving into other hardwoods, but right now our main focus is going to be conifer species. We see here that Douglas fir is one of our highest ones, as well as incense cedar, ponderosa pine, sugar pine, coast redwood, and so on. So how do we move forward? Every year we have to figure out which areas we're targeting. So this year we're targeting these specific seed zones right here. And again, this is specifically for CAL FIRE. If you are not sure of which seed zone you are, please reach out to me and I will put my email in the chat box, as well as I have a slide that has my email information just to walk you through it. So California is divided within different seed zones throughout the state, in ranging, usually it's about the coastal areas, the inland areas, the Sierras, and so forth. And depending on where you are, you're at a specific seed zone. And that seed zone kind of helps us determine which sort of seed source we would use for your specific area. Elevation also takes into consideration because you don't really want to have tree species move from high elevation to lower elevation. It doesn't adapt very well. So the areas that we're targeting are here. These are our seed zones right here. And then some of the partnerships that we're working on and with, as Bridget mentioned, is one of the main ones is that Reforestation Pipeline Cooperative. And again, I want to stress that cooperative approach. We are trying to do everything cooperatively. We are not here as a standalone entity trying to do everything, because CAL FIRE, at least from our side, we realize that that's not really the best approach for us. We are not the only ones trying to reforest. We are not the only ones that have a need. We also have a recurring MOU with our wonderful partners at the U.S. Forest Service that allow us to access their land and do some surveys on their land and kind of have this mutual collaboration of sharing cone resources or surveys and possible collection opportunities together. We also work with our local Mendocino RCD. Actually, they're not local, but we currently have a contract with Mendocino RCD, and we're looking to expand our RCD cooperation. We're doing trainings such as this to have wonderful people like yourself, landowners who are out there wanting to help in any way that they can. We also have orchards that we're investing in as a long-term sort of resource, as well as orchards that we have already invested in from the past that have been established. But as Bridget mentioned, these orchards take some time to establish. But that is a long-term kind of goal that we're looking to set. As of now, our primary collections are wild. So out in the field is where we have a lot of our collections and these private landowners who allow us access to it. We've also started talking with wonderful partners such as Sierra Pacific Industry and other timberland companies, and bringing them into this co-op with American Forest as kind of starting to have this cooperative approach as well. Somewhere along the line, someone needs to start those conversations again where we all sit down at the table and we realize that we all need to pitch in a little bit. So for CAL FIRE, one of our top hurdles is landowner access. And you might say, okay, you guys come in, you're CAL FIRE, you are going to do this X, Y, and Z that might not be related to what you're talking about here, or do anything else. And I want to stress that should any of you, the landowners, or any of you be willing to participate with CAL FIRE, our main goal for the seed bank, for cone surveys, sampling and collection, that is our main goal. We are not there to look at anything else. We are not there to report on anything else. The access that would be granted is specifically for that. So with that being said, you might ask, well, what's in it for me, the landowner? Well, there's a lot of things that are in it, right? The primary thing is, you pat yourself on the back, but that might not be enough for everybody, and that's completely understandable. The other thing is you become aware that you are part of this greater kind of cooperative approach that is not just beneficial to you, but also other landowners. And the top thing is that if CAL FIRE via American Forests, the cooperative as well, Cone Core, which I want to be clear, is CAL FIRE and American Forests are collaborating, as well as U.S. Forest Service, in this Cone Core. So if Cone Core comes out and you give Cone Core the access to the land, you're therefore giving access to CAL FIRE, the U.S. Forest Service, and American Forests to do this like joint approach. So you're sharing that intel within our cooperative. But for the landowner themselves, for the CAL FIRE part and the cone collection part, if you allow us access to your land and there is a viable crop that's worth collecting, we will reserve a portion of the seed for your property. That portion of the seed will not be sold, but will be stored here on at our state facility for you. And that's more of an assurance that should you have a reforestation need later on, that seed will be available to you. And let's think, we are asking for seed from different locations throughout the state. But in order to get that seed, you can't put the cart before the horse. We need to be able to get in there and obtain the seed, do surveys. You cannot ask for seed for areas that you cannot allow access to. And again, this is a cooperative approach. We are not doing it alone. I can't physically do it alone, but we need you. And that brings me to the initiative that we're also pushing here, is the Reforestation Because of You. So this is a small pilot program that we're currently doing this year, and it's an outreach letter for landowner access with cone fact sheets and the seeds that we would reserve for you. I do want to end with this slide, and if any other questions, I see there's a lot of questions in the chat, but please, if you are willing to partner with us, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to Bridget and myself. Here is my email address for any contact that you might be willing to make, or any access that you might be willing to grant. If you are not willing to grant access, that's perfectly fine. We're hoping that through these sort of program here, and we'll be talking about it later, at least you'll be willing to do some surveys elsewhere if that's possible. But do keep in mind that even if you do surveys and we don't have landowner access, we cannot follow through on these surveys because we cannot go on private land. And we, meaning also the Cone Core, also will need access to private lands. With that, I'm going to leave this slide up for a minute. And that's really my portion of the chat. So I'm happy to answer questions, which there seems to be some in the chat box.
Oh, thanks, Denia. We've been answering the questions as they've been coming into the chat. But does anybody have a question they'd like to unmute themselves and ask Denia?
I have a question. Hi.
Hi, Gretchen.
When the seed is collected, say from your private land, and put in the seed bank, how long does it last in storage? I missed the beginning of the program, so you might have already said that. But how long do they store for, and how are they stored?
Sure.
Is it chilled? Does it require electricity? How is that function?
Thank you. That is a great question. So my general philosophy is garbage in is garbage out. That is why we do viability testing in the field. So for a quick kind of summary, which I did not touch on, so you didn't miss, and I probably should have, is the general cycle of cone season is June, July, we have kind of surveys. Maybe before then, we do surveying, we look out in the field, and we see if there's a crop present. Later on, we kind of, reach out to whoever. At this point, what CAL FIRE does is we have CAL FIRE units that have a designated unit forester at each unit that does their cone surveys for their units. They then give us the cone surveys, and we decide on which crops might be viable or continue to be of importance and follow up on. When that crop is then when we then have access to that land that crop was found on, we do a viability test. And then where we cut the cone in half, we look at the seed, cut some seeds, we see how the cone looks, if there's any insect damage, if the embryo is developing well, and then we flag that specific area and say, okay, let's continue to monitor that. Upon that monitoring, we want to capture that sort of cone collection area right before it opens. We do not collect open cones. Seed has been kind of left. So we do not collect open cones. So that viability test we also kind of do upon collection. We'll do like a final cut test just to make sure there hasn't been any recent insect damage that will not make the seed collectible. And then we come and we process it here. So we have different standards based on different species as to what a collectible crop is. And that takes into account the percent filled seed of an embryo, as well as how many filled seeds are in a half cut. That takes a little bit more training. It's kind of something that can be done if you're willing to learn, but there's also a lot of like, okay, is the seed wing, papery? Is it brown? Is it coming off the cone? So obtaining the seed viability tests throughout monitoring, having a final viability test at collection time, and understanding that you're collecting at the right time when it's not immature, but not open coned and spent seed. If you have all of that, you've done the monitoring, you've done the cutting, you've done the final collection cuts, and you see that everything looks great, there's minimal, if any, insect damage, then your seed is incredibly high quality. What we do here as well is we bring the seed and we process it, which means we de-wing it. We make sure the moisture content is good. We take away, I shouldn't say good, is within the range for long-term storage. And afterwards, we also do upgrades, which is take out the needles, anything that is not cone material, any leftover empty seeds that might be present. So what we upgrade is this kind of mixed bag of mainly high quality seed, and we upgrade it to full quality seed. Well, to the best of our extent, you can never get 100% quality, to the highest level of our extent. And once you have that and you have it at the right moisture content, you can store it for many years. At the seed bank, we have seed that is from, I believe the oldest is from the 80s, that is still viable. Viability is usually, depending on species, means how much is going to be growing when you do a germination test after collections. So there's viability in the field, and then there's also viability once you have collected it and are going to put it in long-term storage. So we have seed here from the 80s that still germinates really well. And here we do germination tests every 5 years on older seed lots. So hopefully that answered your question a little bit.
Thanks. So there are a couple other questions, Denia. So what about for property owners who have steep terrain? Is that an issue?
Yes. So it can be an issue. Really, it depends on what you have on your property. For CAL FIRE, we contract out climbers. And I believe our cooperative is going to do the same. We don't have any internal climbers that we currently do. So there's climber considerations, because if you have to think about it, the climbers are having to haul up their gear, which is like 50 plus pounds of gear that they're having to hike up. And, climbers aren't like me physically. They are fit people, but then you also have to bring down all those cones. Typically, we want somewhat of a terrain that's not too steep. However, there are always, um, it's always dependent on what species you have and how high in demand it might be. So if you have steep terrain, but you're really like, you have a great stand and we really need that seed, there might be a way to make this happen. But typically, steep terrain is not something that the climbers are willing to do.
Great. And then there was a question too about, so we're talking here about cone and seed collection, but what about all of the seedlings that are popping up now because of all the rain and snow? Are there any uses for those?
So I guess they would be a use once they get older, and have seed as well. Currently, we're not in Cal Fire, or at least the seed bank and nursery, we're not doing much with propagation in terms of wild propagation of seedlings popping up.
Okay. Is there an age preference of the cone bearing tree, say for Doug fir?
So really, I believe for each species, it's going to vary. The main thing to note is if you see a well-developed cone and the tree itself is climbable, the age doesn't really matter as much to us if the cone's developing well and the tree is climbable. So what does that mean? Because the site that you're at can vary differently depending on your tree densities. Sometimes your tree can be 50 years old, but it's really thin and very spindly, and the wind can just, it seems like, will knock it over. No matter how old that tree is, that climber's not going to climb that tree. So age is kind of not as much into consideration as much as like, okay, what is the diameter of the tree? Is it actually, do the cones look decent? And remember, we're going to be doing viability tests. So we're going to be grabbing some of these cones. And if they look immature, or if they're not developing correctly, then that's not going to be something we're going to go after. But when you, as people in this lecture right here, or in this series right here, are thinking about it, think about it more of like, okay, how sturdy is this tree? Is this tree straight? Is there any sort of like fork tops on this tree? Does this tree look diseased? And if none of that is the case, if the tree looks healthy, if the morphology of the tree is straight and you see cones on there, that's kind of more important than thinking, I need to find out, this tree is like 10 years old or 50 years old. That's not as important as seeing, all of these other factors. So I wouldn't focus too much on the age as much as the conditions out there.
Great, thanks, Denia. All right, so if you have any more questions for Denia, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. And we're going to turn back over to Bridget to talk a little bit about the agency landowner collaboration effort. So, Denia, if you could stop sharing your screen.
Get out of the way.
Yeah, there
you go. Everybody good? See my screen? Alrighty. So I mentioned the Reforestation Pipeline Cooperative in the last presentation, but I didn't really explain much about it. So I'm going to take the opportunity now to explain a little bit about that and how that relates to agency and landowner collaboration efforts. So this image was in the last slide deck as well, but again, the cooperative is from the findings of the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. And as Denia mentioned, it is a collaboration and is supported by the Forest Service and Cal Fire and American Forests to manage the cooperative and work collaboratively with Cal Fire, Forest Service, and other agency partners as well to increase collaboration and partnerships across the pipeline. So the mission of the Reforestation Pipeline Cooperative is to provide a platform upon which diverse stakeholders can work together to accelerate timely, effective, climate-informed reforestation practices across all lands. So again, similar to CONCOR and the same as CONCOR, the Reforestation Pipeline Partnership works across both public and private lands. The way that the cooperative is organized includes quarterly gatherings to bring reforestation experts, private landowners and private industry, government agency, nonprofit partners, resource conservation districts, and really anyone who's working on reforestation and wanting to make sure that they're able to work with others and connect with others that are doing similar work. Meet quarterly at quarterly gatherings, and those were launched in November, and they work to identify the needs along the reforestation pipeline. So for example, Cone Camp was mentioned earlier, and that was developed after the meeting in November when we recognized that there was a need for more trainings on cones and for more people to understand that there is a state seed need. Again, it works cross-boundary and works to increase communication across these groups as well. So there's online platforms for people to be able to communicate with one another, and additionally, just opportunities to collaborate in reforestation efforts. One of the ways that that happens is through huddles, and those are smaller breakout groups where they're really action-oriented and on very specific topics. So for example, one was on cone trainings, and that's how we developed cone camps. And then also we're able to have follow-up meetings on those to ensure that the action is being taken to create those and also remove the barriers or the backlogs along the pipeline. So to make sure that we're really following through on what we're talking about with the cooperative, things are really happening out in the field and in the reforestation sector as a whole. Also currently, the California Reforestation Pipeline Cooperative is working with state agencies to develop the state strategy, state seed strategy. And so this is to achieve collective action on cone collection, cone monitoring, and also growing and sharing resources among partners. So overall, it's opportunities to improve that collaboration and increase collection of cone crops. Another thing I want to mention again is that reforestation because of you. So working with private landowners and the nonprofits and the agencies so that we all are aware of the opportunities across all lands. This is an image from the previous Reforestation Pipeline Cooperative meeting. All of the meetings, they're listed on this last slide here. So we have one coming up in July and another in the fall. That QR code there is to sign up for the newsletter. So if you want to use your phone and scan it, you can. And that way you can stay up to date on things happening with the cooperative, and also it involves other things such as like research papers that have come out on reforestation in California, even job opportunities are sometimes listed in there. So it's a good resource to have and to be able to stay informed on reforestation across the state. I'll just pause for a second in case anybody is taking a picture of it. I can also drop the link in the chat if that's easier for folks. Alrighty, so this outlines again the different groups within the cooperative, or the different ways that the cooperative works. So those quarterly gatherings, the huddles within the quarterly gatherings that I already mentioned, and then also there's that reforestation working group from the task force is the steering group for the cooperative. So we are making sure that we're continuing this work is really what the cooperative is all about, and doing so in a way that is collective action and not in our silos. And that is most of what I had to talk about there, but I also just want to mention that cone monitoring is is really an opportunity for you to get outside and grab your binoculars and take a look at the trees around you. And I know that Ricky's going to share the app that's going to be available for people to use to report cone crops. And that's an app that will be shared by Forest Service and CAL FIRE. And really, it's an opportunity to be involved in this work and not only have opportunities to look at your natural ecosystems in your area, but also have tangible and positive impacts on the ecosystems around you. So I really encourage you all to get outside, if not for the enjoyment of looking at the beautiful conifer trees, but to have opportunities to be involved in this work. And then finally, my contact information is here, as is Britta Dyer, who's the Senior Director of Landscape Integration, and Shelly, who is Shelly Villalobos, who's the manager of the cooperative. So if you have questions about anything specific to their roles, please feel free to reach out. And then finally, this QR code here is a video from American Forests that is about saving the white bark pine. And it talks about the importance of that species and how we are all working in an effort to save that species as well. So that's all I have. I'll check the chat for any questions, and thank you all.
Thanks, Bridget. Yeah, if you could drop the chat, the link into the chat, that would be great.
Yeah.
And then before I turn it over to Ricky, there is a question about, can someone address about a forest with dead trees due to drought in forest with still healthy trees? Let's see, Hugh, you might need to clarify that question just a little bit. I mean, you can unmute yourself and ask it.
Okay. I have trees that, I have probably 100 trees on my small piece of property, and about 30 of them have died because of bark beetle. Is it not feasible for anybody to even come here and look at the other trees that are still healthy? That's basically the question.
That's a good question. I think Denia would probably have a better answer than I would, but yeah, I'll let you go, Denia.
Sure. Yeah, I think, one of the things that we want to kind of establish is like what is considered, a collectible crop, which we may not have touched too much on here. But collectible crop can vary. Usually we're looking within a stand, a few trees, around 10 trees or so. We're happy to do surveys, but that also, like Bridget mentioned, like if you want to go outside, Ricky will introduce the tree survey app or the survey app, in which case you can feed us information as like picture wise to see what, your trees look like and whether or not there is a crop present. And then from there we can continue things, but I don't want to say we would rule anything out until we have like a visual of what, your trees look like as well. So please, and Bridget can also add if she'd like to address anything further, but that would be my recommendation is, if you're able to do information regarding or a survey and send us a picture and let us see what it visually looks like. Don't rule it out. We're not going to rule it out.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and with the needle testing, I know we like for sugar pines that are rust resistant sugar pines, it may be that the healthier trees, if that was a disease that was in an area, those trees, we really would want to collect from. So despite them being surrounded by that mortality, they could be really great assets to the seed bank and to the future of reforestation. So I think it's worth it. And also just having that data is something that both CAL FIRE, Forest Service, American Forests across the state, we're looking to know what cones are out there and what's producing. So I think the data in general is helpful, but yeah, appreciate all your efforts.
Thanks, Bridget. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Ricky. Continue to put your questions in the chat box. We're loving reading all the questions. Ricky, you should have co-host status, and why don't you make sure you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. sorry, give me 1 second here. I just saw that last question there in chat about cone years variability by species and zone and years, and the answer was yes. And I recall a really interesting publication that came out that looked at just how variable it can be. So unfortunately, there's no good answer for it. Just that, yes, it varies quite a bit from year to year. So hopefully you can all see my slideshow now. So my name is Satomi. I'm a forest advisor with UC Extension. I am based in the Western Sierras, so I cover Sutter, Yuba, Butte, Nevada counties. But UC has been helping CAL FIRE and American Forests and the Forest Service work together to try to build out a cone collection app that we can use to submit observations of cones. As many of you guys know, have noted, many of you guys have trees. You know, some of them do have cones, and these are really critical information that we do need to collect and we want to be aware of so that we can help inform and craft a larger narrative of where we can focus our limited cone collection resources throughout the state for any given year. There we go. Once again, this is just that quick overview that Bridget had shared earlier. Yeah, it's a great overview of the reforestation cycle. I did take a minute while we were chatting to add in a small note on step 0, which I think is very relevant for this group here. And that we do want, to help and provide our agency partners with access where we can to try to increase the number of areas and locations where we can collect cones. I also did want to just point out, we don't have time today to go through the entire reforestation process and the cone processing process. Denia did touch on quite a bit of it today. But for this part of the cone collection and cone survey observation portion, we're really going to be focusing on this first step 1. I think, Kim, and correct me if I'm wrong, as we kind of continue on with this special session and into the field day, we'll have more opportunities to talk a little bit more about these other topics.
You are right.
There you go. I think my battery's dying on my keyboard, so it takes a minute here to change slides. So we're really introducing the ArcGIS Survey 123 app, and I'll go over a little bit about what the survey app is and how it's used and how it works. And we'll go over just some brief suggestions on how you might begin to go out and deploy this app in your own spaces, or even when you're out in walks at national parks or national forests, when you're out hiking and backpacking. There's a lot of opportunities for you to engage and help provide data and help us identify cone locations to go and collect. The first step is to install Survey 123. For those of you, and we'll have a few minutes here for you all to take out your phones if you wanted to go ahead and try it while I talk. Go ahead and take a snapshot of this QR code and navigate to the website, install the app. You can also type in this very difficult to read URL here at the bottom right, if you like. But Survey 123 is a smartphone application. It is an Esri-based app, but it is free to use. There's no cost to you as members of the public. We have created an app that everyone will be able to access and interact with and submit it. It should work on all of your devices. I would encourage you all to try installing it today. And if you have issues with it, feel free to contact Kim or myself, or talk to us when we do the in-person field day later on next month. This app is designed for two groups of people: for citizen scientists, for landowners, for California naturalists, our outdoor communities that are out and about observing and reaching far into areas that we typically wouldn't be able to with our limited staff resources. We are also engaging with resource professionals, so you will be using the same app and you'll be conducting the same surveys that all of our professional foresters, all of our nursery professionals, all of our American Forest Cone Corps professionals will be using when we're going out and doing these cone observation surveys. This app, and I don't know about everyone in this room, but I'm a little bit more privacy conscious. I do feel like it's important to disclose. This app will collect anything you submit, so anything you type into the app, and we'll go through that here in a minute. It will collect location data, and that is important because the location data will help us know where you are in the forest when you're looking at cones, so that when we do a follow-up survey, we can make sure that the person gets to the same area and we're looking at the same stand of trees with cones. There will also be photos that will be taken from your phone that will be submitted through this app. So just be aware of that. You know, this isn't going to dig into your personal data, but just be aware that you will need to give it some level of permissions regarding your location and regarding your photo album in order to make it work. So hopefully you've all had a chance to go and take a snapshot of the QR code and log in. If you haven't, if you don't have Survey 123 on your phone already, it's going to look somewhat like this workflow. If you go to if you take a picture, the QR code should pull up something. Sorry, let me find my. I'm not sure if you can all see my mouse, so I'm gonna see if because otherwise I'm just kind of gesticulating at the screen. But so here on the far left, there it should be able to pull up in your web browser the URL, and that will allow you to download the survey form using the appropriate smartphone software. So if you have an iOS, you'll want to get it from the Apple Store. If you have an Android phone, you'll want to get it from Google Play, and so on and so forth. Once you install it, it should automatically populate the cone observation survey inside the app. If you don't want to install the app, you can actually open it on your browser directly, but be aware that if you do it that way, you have to have internet service in order to use the app. If you download and install the app, you can actually go out deep into the backwoods to use this tool without needing to interact. Without needing internet. So one thing to note, and you know, this is something that, you know, we're really just trying to give you a high level overview to try to lay out the broad strokes, and then as we get a little bit deeper into this program and as we have more time in person in the field, we can talk a little bit more about the nuances between cone observations and surveys and what to look for. One thing to just kind of keep note of in your brain as you're planning this out is that cone needs are going to vary significantly. Denia touched on that a little bit, but for every species and seed zone and elevation, there will be a specific need. What that means is that your particular area may or may not be in need of seed for this particular year. That doesn't mean we don't need it. It's just that we have areas with greater priority. Oftentimes, these are driven by, you know, past years of extreme wildfire, or, you know, areas where we've had just a depletion of stock. You know, as we plant trees out and we don't have a commensurate masting event, we're not going to be able to collect more seed and refill our seed banks. And so certain areas in the state might actually be prioritized because of that additional need. There's also, you know, there's also just unexpected events. I think, yeah, I mentioned, you know, large-scale wildfires, large bark beetle events, any of these events which really trigger a mass die-off. That not only removes our ability to collect seed from that region, but it also forces us to immediately draw down our seed bank and grow those trees out to try to replant and reestablish those stands. And that starts to create a lag effect that we're slowly trying to build up to. But as you all know, it takes time. It takes years for a tree to reach maturity where it can start producing cones again. One thing of note, and this is kind of an exception, and this is also what Bridget was hinting at earlier regarding the sugar pine, is sugar pine is unique in the state with the fact that we are always looking for blister rust resistant sugar pine. For most places, there are a lot of concerns on, we want to make sure there's good genetic variability in the stand. The stand is of good health and good vigor. They've got good form, so they're less likely to get exposed to disease. In a typical collection scenario, that's kind of what we're looking for. The exception is a sugar pine because the blister rust resistant sugar pine genetics are so valuable that we will go out of our way, or at least the Forest Service will go out of their way to go and collect cones. So that is something to be aware of. For those of you who've ever been out hiking about and you see a silver band on a sugar pine tree, that's probably a marker for resistant sugar pine. And I believe the band is to help prevent squirrels from climbing up it and collecting the cones, but it's also just a good indicator for that individual having been collected and tested and known to be a resistant sugar pine, and something that we are tracking and aware of. There are also, you'll see here, there are also a lot of other factors that do influence collection priorities and needs year to year. For the state as a whole, this is a process that is done between CAL FIRE at LA Moran, so that would be Denia, and the Forest Service Region 5 geneticist. And basically each year they sit down and they go over and they analyze what our expected needs are in terms of seed zone, elevation, genetics, priority reforestation projects, and they come up with this prioritization list. This map here on the right too, as I just kind of shuffle through them, you'll see, that the needs and the priorities vary by region of the state. And so it's not always, sometimes you'll see something like out here on the coast where, there's just a real lack of incense cedar seeds. And then that, compounded by recent fire activity is really putting pressure on this, this zone here. One final thing too is, as you're kind of thinking through and planning your observations, obviously if you're located on a forest and you can just poke your head out the window like I did earlier today, it can be really easy to go and observe cones and observe and go look for potential seeds to collect. But time is also a very, very important resource and a very limited resource for everyone here, I'm sure. Something to think about is if you're planning a trip, if you're going backpacking, to overlay where you're going with the species and the seed zones to identify which specific species are high priority in the area you're going to be at. And that can kind of help focus your observation efforts, so you're really finding trees that are in high need, not necessarily, finding a lot of cone for a species in a seed zone and an elevation that we already have adequate seed bank volume of. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Once again, this is a little bit just about what you're doing once you're out in the stand. There's some broad indicators. Denia has, and LA Moran and CAL FIRE has an excellent video on their website that goes through this in much better detail. But when you're out in a stand and you're looking for cones and cone-bearing trees, broadly speaking, you want to look for many trees in a stand. You want good genetic variability. You want trees to cross-pollinate. If you're in an area where there's only 1 or 2 trees, they may be self-pollinated, and that leads to inferior genetics. You also want cones that are located on dominant and co-dominant trees. So those would be your trees in the upper canopy layer. Generally, they have performed better and they're going to be a little bit healthier. So the quality of the cone will be a little bit better, right? And so when we collect them and when Denia is processing them, the number and volume of viable seeds will likely be higher, and that will create a better product at the end. Other things to look for is just general health, right? And there's a little bit of nuance here. That there's always discussion about, physical characteristics versus just pest characteristics. What we have found is oftentimes forking behavior, spiraling, broken tops, these, while they're mechanical and they're phenotypical deficiencies, and really coming at it from a more timber and lumber production sense, a lot of those characteristics also means that there's a lot more opportunities and avenues for disease infection. And so typically they do go hand in hand, where you want nice, tall, straight trees because it's less likely to have a crook in it that might catch an ember and catch on fire, or might have a branch that's less likely to break off and then have a wound on the side of the tree where fungal spores can infect the tree. And these physical characteristics then transform down the line over time into, good formed, well-formed trees that can resist future disturbance events. One last thing to just mention is if you have the ability to, collecting lots of sites, collecting lots of entries in the survey as you go through will help. It's important to be able to go through and see where there is a lot of cone observations being made. We touched on this briefly, right? There's a difference in masting activity year to year, decade to decade. So oftentimes a specific region for a specific species at a specific elevation will be very prolific, but the same species in a slightly different seed zone, or that same species in the same seed zone at a slightly different elevation, or that same species at the same elevation on a north facing versus a south facing slope may or may not have the same masting activity. So if there's a lot of entries and there's a lot of people saying, hey, in zone 536 at elevation 3000 for, sugar pine, there's a lot of people seeing a lot of masting going on. That helps us know that, hey, this is a good year for sugar pine at that elevation at this seed zone. And that helps us focus our follow efforts and our climbing and collecting efforts. So hopefully I've stalled long enough that everyone has had a chance to go and install Survey 123 on their app, and hopefully you can open up the app on your phone and you can see this screen here. I'm just going to go through this quickly for a second, and then we'll switch over onto the web version. So hopefully we can do that. But once again, you do not need an ArcGIS online account. You do not need to create an account to submit observations. You can continue without signing in as a guest. Once you do that, you should see the survey itself pop up on the screen. And if you click on that, it should open up something that looks similar to this here on the right. So hopefully, as you're all looking at this, you can now see my computer screen, which should hopefully see this same thing.
Yes, we can see it, Rick.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so as you go through, there's quite a few fields in the survey form, but you can just try it on your phone as you go through. The first one is, where are you? And once again, this really touches back to the permissions and access restriction, which is a significant obstacle for us being able to go out and have American Forests or CAL FIRE or Forest Service crews go out and observe and monitor cones on that stand. So, if you're on federal land or state land or parks land, go ahead and press public land and you're all clear. If you need to go to private land, any information you can provide about the property owner, anything you can do to help the LA Moran and Placerville and American Forests get in touch with the landowner to ask for permission and confirm access would be greatly appreciated. So phone number would be really nice if you can find it. Email would be preferred if at all possible. After that, you want to go through and just fill in your name and your contact email, right? If there's a positive cone occurrence and there's a need for follow-up, we'll want to be able to get back in touch with you in order to ask you. And oftentimes, I might just know, your smartphone devices are pretty good GPSs. The newest ones you can get within 10 feet. But if you're down at the bottom of a draw and you're in, 100% canopy, your GPS signal might not be great. So the signal that is collected on the phone may not be exactly where it is in the forest where you're seeing the cones. And so we might need it, or someone might be wanting to follow up with you to just confirm that the observation is located where they thought it was. As you go through, you'll see you can go through and select different species. If it's not listed here, there's a short list here, but if it's not listed here, you can just go in and enter your own species of interest. And there's a brief guide on features to collect. Kim, if I'm running a little slow, please let me know and I can hurry it up as well. You're okay for now, Rick. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So as you're going through, you'll notice these are some of the main features that we're looking for as you're going out in your stand or on your forest and looking for cones. The first thing is the number of trees with cones, right? And once again, we're looking for areas with, 4+ trees with cones ideally, so that we can send a crew out and they can collect several cones and several bushels of cones at the same time. That having 4+ trees, over 4 trees with cones also helps increase the probability that there was a lot of cross-pollination happening and the genetics of those trees will be better. Once you do that, we're also, as cone observers, we're also going to need you to evaluate the potential crop. And really what that means is assessing how many trees have many cones in the top 2/3 of the tree. One thing you'll note here, and I do want to highlight this because it is an important just detail to note. Light, medium, heavy refers to how many trees have a lot of cones on the tree. It does not refer to how many cones are on the tree. It refers to how many trees have a lot of cones. And once again, the reason for that is typically when we see trees with light and even sometimes medium stocking of cones, that tree is not really producing a healthy cone crop. It may be a stress response, or it might just be putting 1 or 2 out that year. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the tree itself is making a concerted effort to produce cones. And that also means that when we do the processing, it's likely to have a much lower fertility rate than is found on a trees that is producing many cones. Another thing to note, we do ask everyone to take a photo with the app. And there are some, once again, there is a training on the CAL FIRE website, which goes into a great amount of detail. But generally, you want to try to capture the top part of the tree. We want to have a good visual of the crown. Things to avoid. Try not to take a distant photo of a tree where it's blocked off, where you might not be able to see the crown. Right, this photo here, the second from the left, we're shooting directly into the sun. That's a little bit tricky to see. You can see that the sunlight really makes it hard to see whether or not there's any cones on that individual tree. This one here, the third from the right, once again, the sun is there. This one's getting to be okay, but you can see there's that interception from that oak tree that's making it a little bit tricky to really see what's going on the top of the tree. And finally, if you can get a good angle, try to get at it with the sun behind your back so that you don't have that glare on the photo. That is going to be really what's helpful. There is something to note with this particular tree. This is a decent angle, but this is definitely not a tree that I would collect and submit in the app. And I encourage you all to type in chat why you think that is. And we're talking about this gray pine here in the middle. So once you collect your photos, once you do your stand evaluation and identify how many trees have cones and whether or not there are sufficient trees with cones to be light, medium, or heavy, you're also going to want to just verify your location. So Survey 123, as I had mentioned before, does automatically collect your GPS data, so it will automatically estimate where you are. You can see here, I just ran this earlier today, and it just kind of plopped me around here. And it was just an estimation that it made. What you can do is you can click on this little crosshair on the bottom right of your screen, and it will automatically use your GPS device to move that widget onto where your GPS device is telling you. It's important to cross-check the GPS device with where you think you are. And honestly, if you have a map, I would trust a physical map over the GPS device just to verify where you are. If you know there's a road and you know you're right off the road and your GPS device shows you not anywhere near that road, you might want to do a small manual adjustment. And that's really just going to help make sure that when the observation crews follow up and go back in, they'll be they'll have more information and have a little bit more accurate information to find your location. Or sorry, find the location of where those cone-bearing trees were located. I did also just want to show this, mostly because I find it interesting. If you're ever interested, you can click on this satellite icon on the top right. It looks like a satellite shooting waves out. And that'll actually tell you a lot of information about your location, about the accuracy of your GPS device, right? So you can see here, I have a horizontal accuracy of 14 feet and a vertical accuracy of 26 feet. You can also switch through, you can go to SkyPlot, and that'll actually tell you how many satellites you have, how many satellites can see your position. The more satellites, the better. So 14 is actually pretty good. You need at least 4 to get a GPS signal, but if you have any less than 10, it's not going to be a great signal, and your accuracy is going to go down a little bit. And that's just something to keep in mind as you're identifying where in the forest you're seeing these cones, and how you want to share that information. And just to wrap up here, there are situations in which you are not going to have a signal set. So as I mentioned earlier, with the Survey 123 app, the app itself will work if you do not have internet reception. However, if you are on the web version, it will not work if you do not have internet reception. If you're out in the woods, which is where most of our cone-bearing trees are, and you are collecting this information, what you're going to want to do when you go through the app is save your observation in the outbox. What that does is it just stores it on your physical device. It'll just store it on here. And then when you get back into service, you can open up the app again. And when you open it up to that main screen, you'll see this additional option down here called Outbox. And you open that up and you can press send, and that'll submit all of your observations from that day, or all of your observations up till that point that haven't been submitted. It'll push all of that up to the cloud, and we'll be able to collect it and review them and follow up. So with that, that's all I had to share, but open it up to questions.
Well, so Ricky, the consensus, well, as to why that picture was not good. We've got a couple answers. Because it's a gray pine. It has only a few cones, has some sort of defect.
These are, so I will push back a little bit on gray pines not being useful. They are incredibly difficult to cut into straight boards. They are incredibly pitchy. They are very flammable. One thing that I have heard about them that is really neat is they are very hard, and they make for very, very hard, very, very durable boards if you ever need something that sees a lot of use. But those are all correct answers. Gray pine is not a species that is on the high priority seed needs list currently. One of the other reasons why that was not a good cone observation was because that it had a very low amount of cones. So there were insufficient cones on that individual tree, and also that tree was an isolate. There was only one other gray pine located in that area. So the genetics for that region would be poor, and therefore not something that we would actually want to collect cones off of.
Okay. And then there are a couple of questions, and I'll open it up to you and Denia and Bridget. One, how might we access or obtain seeds of non-timber species to support biodiversity?
Okay, so currently CAL FIRE is only focusing primarily on conifer species. We are working on a case-by-case basis on hardwood species such as oak. But right now, due to the store ability of these other species, we don't really work on them so much right now because we don't have the ability the resources to do that. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so Jonathan asked if this data is available to the public. So are you referring to the survey app, Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm on a planting app that you can make your maps public. And I'm wondering if these maps are public so that it might actually endanger the location in which we're trying to preserve, or if it's privately held by the owners of the database.
So the needs prioritization maps are public, and that those are widely shared as far as where we need cones collected. Once you submit data, what we will do is aggregate the data before doing any distribution. So we will be able to publicly share which seed zones are having good masting activity. However, the precise locations of where those observations are being made is going to be protected. LA Moran and Placerville will have access to that, and so they will be coordinating and following up with that data directly with the people submitting the observations, but the exact points and locations of that data will not be made public.
And Ricky, maybe you want to touch on just that the fact that we are beta testing this right now.
Yeah, thanks. So yes, you guys, so thank you all for being my guinea pigs. We are still in the process of beta testing this, and we're planning to deploy it this year with the Cone Corps training coming up, as well as with American Forests and all the crews going out this year. So it is still in a beta test. We're relatively firm on the way the app is going to be structured. So there might be a couple things that get moved around, or you might see a few more species pop up on that list of drop downs, but for the most part, you should expect to see the same app that was shown today. I might also mention too, if you do want to start collecting observations, you're more than welcome to. Right now, because we might still do a little bit of fiddling, just be aware if you submit photos with your observations, we'll know that it's a real observations, not just somebody testing and seeing how the app works, if that makes sense. So please do submit a photo of the observations that you find, and that'll help us verify that it's a true observation, not a UX testing exercise.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give a plug too for the Forest Stewardship Program is going to be hosting a cone and seed collection field day on Friday, June 16th at Blodgett Research Forest in Georgetown. We're going to touch a little bit on the needs and priorities that we talked today, but we're going to spend most of the time actually out in the field with the apps running, looking at how it works in the field, how to really identify relevant trees and seeds based on tree physiology. So a really good hands-on practice. As you are all on the webinar tonight, you'll be getting that flyer, but if you know of others that might be interested in attending that, you can feel free to share the flyer out. It's not a prerequisite to attend this webinar before the field day, though you guys will be all smart and be able to answer questions. Couple other questions. So Drew says he has a handful of ponderosa pines with mistletoe. Is it safe to assume that they wouldn't be desirable for collecting even if or when they produce cones?
This came up in a recent discussion we had. So depending on how the tree looks and what the structure is, the fact that it might have cones is not really too much of an issue so much as a climber liability. So having mistletoe can be indicative of other things wrong with the tree, such as, it may have rotting or it may have other issues that would make it unclimbable. So it would need like an assessment just to make sure if the tree if we're able to climb the tree. So it doesn't necessarily rule it out, but because it has mistletoe, it does kind of indicate other issues.
Thanks, Denia. Any other questions? All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I want to thank the speakers for tonight.